Werewolves are one of horror's greatest monsters, but no franchise has done them dirtier than The Howling. What started as one of the best werewolf films ever made turned into a very confusing and downright embarrassing franchise. Seriously, we're talking low-budget disasters, werewolf kangaroos, and a movie that manages to even be worse than Twilight. So grab your silver bullets and let's get started, because today we're ranking every Howling movie from worst to best. Which ones are worth watching? Which ones are worth skipping? We're going to find out. Alright, let's just rip the band-aid off. Coming in at number 8, we have The Howling: New Moon Rising, which is an absolute disaster. If there ever was a film that should be erased from movie history, it would be The Howling: New Moon Rising. Not only is it an insult to horror fans, it's an insult to film fans in general. Instead of a terrifying werewolf tale, what we get is extremely bad 90s country line dancing, improv, and a plot that seems like they just made it up as they filmed. This film is shot like a community theater production. It feels like they just pulled actors off the street or just used extras from the town and just said, hey, say these lines. And don't get me started on the werewolf. You barely see it, and when you do, it looks like something out of the clearance Spirit Halloween bin. This movie is so bad that even the die-hard Howling fans pretend it doesn't exist. There is nothing redeemable about this film, unless you're into awkward bar scenes and 90s mullets. Coming in at number 7, we have The Howling Reborn, or as I like to call it, Temu Twilight. So in 2011, someone decided it would be a good idea to reboot the Howling franchise for the Twilight generation. And you already know what that means. Moody lighting, broody werewolf teens, and a whole bunch of nothing when it comes to the horror department. The movie follows high school senior Will. He discovers that he's a werewolf, and all of a sudden the girl he's been crushing on all year for his senior year has started paying him attention, because of course she has. The problem with this film is it feels less like a Howling movie and more like a bad CW TV episode. It's not connected to the franchise except by name, and instead of a horror movie we get bad CGI, horrible dialogue, and just a bland movie. To be fair, the movie's not unwatchable. We have some decent action scenes, and the werewolves aren't half bad, but the problem is the whole damn movie's just really bland. There's nothing unique about this film. It does nothing for werewolf lore, and by the time the credits roll, you will already have forgotten about it, I promise. If you're a completionist and you just gotta watch it, do it. Otherwise, skip it. It's not worth your time. Coming in at number 6, we have Howling 6: The Freaks, which is a bit of an oddball entry into the franchise, but it's not terrible. In Howling 6: The Freaks takes a completely different approach than the rest of the franchise. Instead of your standard werewolf film, we get a freak show circus where our lead character, who ends up being a werewolf, is captured by a sinister ringmaster who also happens to be a vampire. Interesting, right? At first glance, you might think this is just another low-budget disaster, but it actually has an interesting concept, and it dares to be different when it comes to werewolf movies. Now, I know what you're thinking. A carnival setting, a werewolf in a freak show, and a vampire ringmaster. Sounds like this movie would be a mess and all over the place, but it actually does get some things right. Cinematography isn't half bad here. You have a really cool carnival backdrop. You have the dusty desert town that we get to see. Not too bad for the budget that they had. I was a big fan of the werewolf and vampire idea as well, and the practical effects are really well done. I enjoyed the freaks as well, so I can't complain there. Of course, this is a Howling sequel, so it's still far from perfect. Here's what didn't work. The acting's all over the place, the pacing really slows down and drags in the middle, and we don't get to see a whole bunch of werewolf action. That's right, not a lot of werewolf action for a Howling movie. It never reaches the level of cult classic, but it dares to be different, and I can respect that. This one's definitely worth watching at least once. Coming in at number 5, we have Howling 4: The Original Nightmare, which is basically a remake of the first Howling film, but somehow they managed to just make it very slow and not nowhere near as good as the first one. The biggest difference between this one and the first Howling movie is the lack of werewolf action until the end of the film. It plays out as more of a psychological thriller than a werewolf creature feature, and that really hurt it with a lot of viewers. The movie follows Marie, a writer who's having a mental breakdown, and then her doctor recommends that she gets away to kind of get her focus back on life. Of course, unbeknownst to her, she's going straight into a colony of werewolves. I don't understand how you can remake The Howling but make it so boring and only let the action pick up toward the end. There's absolutely nothing but determination to keep the viewer watching. I can say that the build-up is pretty eerie. The town's very, very strange. The people there, it's kind of like the first one. Everybody's got their own little quirks about them. And surprisingly, it does stay closer to the source material of the novel than the first one did. I don't care though, because the first one was a masterpiece. The biggest complaint people will have about this movie, and have said about this movie, is that it just takes too long to get to the point. You don't see a werewolf till toward the end of the movie, and by then your patience is really tested. The werewolf transformations in this film are a lot worse too as far as the budget goes. I feel like that the budget really suffered on the transformation effects. When we do get them, it's really dimly lit and just altogether not really impressive. This was a decent attempt to bring the Howling back to its roots. It's worth a watch one time if you can suffer the boredom of it. Coming in at number 4, we have Howling 3, The Marsupials, and this movie is one big-ass fever dream. So this movie's the definition of insanity. Instead of standard werewolves, you have werewolf kangaroos. Yes, I don't know what they were thinking when they did this. They even give birth to little mini werewolf kangaroos, and they carry them in their pouches like kangaroos. It's true. The effects are wild, the story makes zero sense, and at times it feels like it's a parody of its own franchise. But honestly, it's one of those movies that you really need to experience in your lifetime at least once, because the insanity from this movie is just unforgettable. A female werewolf runs away from her family, falls in love with a guy who works in the movie business, and then all kind of hell just breaks loose. This whole movie is just one big old what the fuck. The best way I know to describe this film would be if Troma made a Howling movie, it would be Howling 3, The Marsupials. Is it unwatchable? No, actually quite the contrary. I would encourage you to watch this just to get the experience in your life. Coming in at number 3, we have Howling 5, The Rebirth, and I actually enjoyed this one as it was my favorite since the original. Alright, imagine if the Howling and the board game Clue had a baby. This would be the Howling 5. The majority of the film takes place inside of a creepy old castle, and it's really more of a murder mystery whodunit with a werewolf. That's right, a group of strangers are trapped together, and one of them is secretly the werewolf that's picking off everybody. This is one of the better sequels in terms of atmosphere. The castle setting is genuinely creepy. It gives a real Gothic horror vibe to the whole thing. The only downside is the werewolf is very scarce in this movie, and we do not see a whole lot of it. It's really a group of people just wandering around the castle for most of the movie waiting to be picked off while trying to figure out who the werewolf is. But if you like slow burn horror with a murder mystery element to it, then this movie will be for you and definitely worth checking out. Just don't expect to be wowed by a ton of werewolf action because you will be sorely disappointed. Coming in at number 2, it's Howling 2, Your Sister is a Werewolf. 2 words, Christopher Lee. This movie is absolute chaos. It's got werewolf orgies, punk rock, and Christopher Lee wearing some absolutely ridiculous things. This movie is the definition of a hot mess, but my god is it fun. The movie opens up shortly after the first one, and we see Ben learning that his sister was a werewolf, which is now part of some grander werewolf scheme involving the queen of werewolves, Sturba. If you know, you know. Look, objectively, the movie is not good, but it's fun as hell. And the werewolves kind of look like Party City rejects, but I digress. But if you love insanely bad over-the-top 80s horror movies, then this one is definitely right up your alley. Not to mention Christopher Lee's in it, and in my opinion, he's one of the best things about the movie, if not the best. Well, besides Sturba. Coming in at number 1, the undisputed champion, the original Howling. That's right. The Howling isn't just the best in the franchise. It's one of the best werewolf films ever made, in my opinion. The movie took practical effects to the next level, and it actually delivered a really engaging psychological horror movie. And it gave us one of the most terrifying werewolf transformations to ever be put on film. So what makes the Howling stand out? Well, for starters, it's genuinely creepy. And after our lead is traumatized by a serial killer in the movie, she's sent to a colony to get some much needed relaxation. The only problem is it's a colony of werewolves. Oh yeah. This sets up one of the most unsettling, terrifying werewolf tales ever told. But in my opinion, what makes it work is that the terror builds gradually throughout the film, and it just does not leave you alone for 1 second. There's a sense of paranoia here that makes it feel almost like a psychological horror film, but when the horror does hit, it hits like a truck. One of my favorite things about the film, though, is how the werewolves aren't just mindless killing machines. They're actually part of a secret society, and they coexist among humans and manipulate them. Let's talk about the werewolf design. Oh my god, it's still one of my favorite werewolf designs till this day. They're genuinely terrifying. So why is The Howling number 1? Well, it's the only film in the franchise that really delivers on all of its potential. It has an amazing script, genuinely terrifying moments, and some of the best werewolves that we ever got on screen. So if you're only going to watch one Howling movie, this is the one. And there you have it, every Howling movie ranked from worst to best. Do you agree with my ranking, or are you secretly a fan of werewolf kangaroos? If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell for more deep dives on horror content. Y'all have a good one, and I'll see you in the next one.